The recent reboot of She-Ra has been gaining popularity ever since the show's release, but since its announcement there have been a number of people disgusted by its mere existence. For a lot of these people, they consider it nothing more than yet another garbage reboot in a long line of garbage reboots. For others, they consider it a substanceless piece of propaganda. So for this video, I wanted to try to explain why I think this show is worthy of your attention and isn't what a lot of these people decided it was. Let's start by breaking down these perceptions of the series, beginning with the accusation that it's a terrible reboot that insults the original. Unfortunately, the announcement of She-Ra came at the worst possible time, shortly after the announcement of Thundercats Roar, a reboot that faced immense criticism for reducing its original show down into a generic-looking comedy cartoon. Thundercats Roar was far from the first to face this kind of reception, with the trend becoming all too common between shows like Teen Titans Go, Ben 10, and Powerpuff Girls. But it was such an egregious example that it generated massive discussion about these reboots. People had their pitchforks at the ready for any new franchise revivals that came along, which meant that when the new She-Ra was announced, it ran into immediate criticism from the people tired of seeing these classic shows receive downgrades. While I understand the apprehension at supporting yet another reboot, I think comparison to a show like Thundercats Roar is inaccurate. She-Ra does make a lot of changes from the original, but many of them feel to the show's benefit. Characters are given personalities that better suit the new tone of the show, and new designs to better present these personalities. Unlike Thundercats Roar, it doesn't feel like a direct downgrade into something completely different from the original. Instead, it feels like an evolution into something bigger that takes advantage of how storytelling and TV animation has improved since the 80s. If I would compare it to anything, I would say it's more like the 2000s TMNT, 2017 DuckTales, the recent revival of Carmen Sandiego, and even the 2011 reboot of Thundercats, than many of the examples mentioned earlier. So if you were able to find yourself enjoying any of these reboots despite the changes they made from the original, then I think there is a possibility you'll like this show. The other accusation against the show is that it's a blatant piece of SJW propaganda being used to push political agendas. So let's get to the elephant in the room. She-Ra has gay characters. There are 2 confirmed gay couples and some other relationships or attractions that are implied. However, the show doesn't really treat these characters as any different from anyone else. Nobody at any point even says the word gay or imply that these people are different or special. While the show does feature these characters and probably takes some pride in featuring them, it doesn't sacrifice the show's story, characters, or world building to include them. Instead of using these characters to create a victim narrative used to criticize the real world, they are just treated like anybody else, which I'd say goes against the SJW norm of trying to force social justice narratives into stories. As for other SJW talking points, feminism is never even brought up. Racism is only touched upon very lightly to help establish a character, and despite some of the characters appearing overweight, there is never any attempt at overt body positivity messages. If this show is supposed to be a gigantic mouthpiece for SJWs, then I think it's doing a pretty shit job at it. Because of this, the show is often criticized with the exact same weak talking points time and time again. The characters don't look feminine enough. Look at this out-of-context gay moment. And, oh no, they made this one fat! It's approaching! Get it away! Get it away! Get it away! Get it away!
And I started seeing it everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks. Everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing. Over and over and over and over and over again.
It's clear that a lot of the hate for the show comes from people desperately trying to reinforce their bias against it. It's fine if you've watched the show and didn't like it. It's also fine if you don't have an interest in watching it in the first place. But if you're cherry-picking out of context scenes, harshly criticizing minor issues that you disagree with on a political level, and mischaracterizing something to make it seem much more egregious, all so that you can can feed your own ego, then I hope someday you can understand the concept of irony. Also, I shouldn't have to explain this, but a show isn't its fandom. I don't care how cringy the fandom gets, the show is still the same regardless. With that out of the way, let's get into why you should watch the show, starting with what's been a large source of controversy: its character designs. In the 80s, the show had the disadvantage of having to design its characters around the toys, which meant that many of the characters had to fit the same mold. Because of this, many of the characters look way too similar between their heights, body types, and faces, which makes a lot of these characters not interesting to look at because they seem like the same character with a different set of hair and clothes. Luckily, the reboot doesn't have to deal with the same kind of restrictions, leading each of the characters to have their own distinct design that makes them stand out from everyone else. To show you the improvement in character designs between each series, let's compare these designs of the same character. While both characters have different personalities, they still have the same kind of skills, but you wouldn't be able to tell that at first glance. On the left, there is really nothing in her design that describes who she is or what she does. Meanwhile, on the right, you can immediately pick up on some things. She has an oil stain on her shirt that implies she works with machines often. Her gloves are bulky, the kind that someone who works with dangerous technology would probably want to wear. Combine that with her welding mask, steel-toed boots, and overalls, and you get the impression that she is someone whose life revolves around engineering and technology. The original character was also a gifted engineer, but nothing about her design establishes that to the audience. Beyond that, we can also see that on the right, the character is very short compared to the size of her massive hair. Her hair is also much less restricted than the design on the left that has the hair in multiple ties, which makes it easier to make toys of, but doesn't help establish that the hair is like extra appendages for her. The right's design makes the hair feel like a more important aspect of the character, while the left doesn't stand out as much. The right's design also helps establish her personality a lot more. Her chaotic hair, undone overalls, and oil stains imply that she's chaotic and active in nature. She doesn't care about keeping herself too clean, and she needs her hair to be relatively unrestricted because she needs them to act as multiple limbs while energetically working on her projects. All of this can be seen in just one single design. And I'm not making this comparison just to shit on the original, as I understand that with the limitations they had, along with the almost 35 years worth of evolution in TV animation since the show first came out, it is really fighting an uphill battle. I'm mainly pointing this out to show that the series isn't a downgrade from the original when it comes to character designs. If anything, it's a massive improvement. At its core, though, I'd say the show's greatest strength is its characters and the dynamics between them, with the clearest example of this being the relationship between the main character Adora and her former best friend turned rival, Catra. Both were raised in the Horde together by its second-in-command, Shadow Weaver, and while she raised Adora to be successful, the same cannot be said of Catra, who was often abused by her. This led to a relationship where Catra heavily depended on Adora, and Adora promised to always be there for her. But then Adora, after discovering her ability to turn into She-Ra and witnessing how evil the Horde actually was, refuses to go back to them, hurting Catra in the process. Unlike Adora, Catra wasn't naive to how the Horde operated, and she didn't care. For years she had accepted that, and felt as long as she and Adora were together, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they had each other, but with neither side agreeing to join the other, Catra now lost the person she depended on the most. However, Catra uses this loss to her own advantage. The position Adora was groomed for now open, Catra suddenly finds opportunity before her. Now, for the first time in her life, she was actually gaining power and prestige, with even Shadow Weaver, the woman who abused her throughout her childhood, unable to hold her back. After years of living in Adora's shadow, she now finally had the chance to prove to everyone that even with Adora's greater natural skill, she could still surpass and defeat her, proving that she's worth something. Meanwhile, Adora puts heavy expectations on herself to live up to her own destiny. She fears not being good enough to save the world, and often takes the blame for anything that goes wrong, even when it isn't really her fault. Adora also finds it hard to find the will to fight Catra because of the feelings of guilt and responsibility she has towards her. And this creates the foundation for these characters as we get to see each of them grow and face adversity in their own ways, while their relationship changes along with them. And if I had to point to anything as being the main draw of the series, I would say it's the story of these two characters, but that's far from the only interesting characters and relationships in She-Ra. The show boasts a cast of likable and intriguing people that bounce off each other excellently. Whether it's a tense conversation with the manipulative Shadow Weaver, or a meaningful talk between enemies about how to tackle their individual relationship problems, She-Ra manages to keep these interactions engaging and make us care about everyone involved. Strangely enough, though, the characters that I became invested in the most were the villains of the Horde. I've already gone into detail on Catra, but alongside her you have the friendly Scorpia and the chaotic Entrapta that together show the human side of the Horde, as each of these characters feel like they have a reason for being there. Catra sees the Horde as an opportunity to make a name for herself. Scorpia sees it as a chance to befriend people who won't look down on her, and Entrapta takes advantage of the Horde's technology and loose morals to create technology to her heart's content. To each of these characters, the Horde isn't just an evil organization that they work for, but a place where they can be themselves. And together, these misfits form a bond that I find genuinely endearing. But my personal favorite relationship in the entire Horde is the one between Entrapta and the evil dictator, Hordak. Hordak was born a clone of Horde Prime, the leader of a massive spacefaring empire. There, he was a well-respected general until it was discovered that he was genetically defective. Sent to die on the front lines, he encountered a portal that dropped him in Etheria with no way of coming back. From there, he built an army to take over the planet, but his main concern is trying to one day return home and regain his place at Horde Prime's side. You see, under his cold and commanding exterior is someone who is desperately trying to prove himself to the person who threw him away. And as his body continues to fail him and his experiments bear no success, he locks himself in his room, leaving the work of running the Horde to his subordinates. And there he sits, faced with failure after failure as he tries to get home, which starts to make him think that maybe Prime was justified in getting rid of a failure like him. But then there's Entrapta. Entrapta throughout the series is characterized as having almost no fear. She partakes in dangerous experiments without thinking of the consequences, almost gets herself burned alive trying to save a robot, and even offers to cut off one of her own limbs as a solution to a problem. And it's because of this lack of fear that Entrapta is finally the person to make a connection with Hordak. She's too unafraid to run away from him, and he desperately needs someone like Entrapta to help him get back home. This leads to the two becoming lab partners, and as time goes on, they grow a mutual respect for each other. Something that is surprising considering how much Hordak looks down on the people of Etheria. Eventually, he ends up fainting in front of Entrapta due to his defects, leading her to nurse him back to health. In this moment of vulnerability, Hordak confides in her his origin, to which Entrapta responds by explaining through science why Hordak has nothing to be ashamed of. To her, science and technology isn't a means to an end, but a chance to discover and create. To Entrapta, failures and imperfections aren't problems, they're beautiful parts of the process that should be appreciated just like the successes. And she extends this view to people as well. Up to this point, Hordak reacted with anger and defeatism every time an experiment failed. For him, science was about fixing his problems and making himself worthy, but now finally there was someone whose perspective tells him that maybe he's beautiful just the way he is. And now Hordak has found in Entrapta a true friend, and potentially something even more. And then Catra ruins everything. Season 3, I would say, is the high point in the series because of how it takes many of these relationships I've been praising throughout the video and pushes them to their absolute limits. Catra in Season 3 is reduced to nothing, going from the second in command of the Horde to traveling the Crimson Wastes on a suicide mission, and the only reason why she's even getting to do that is because of Entrapta vouching for her. With essentially nothing left to lose anymore, Catra enters confrontations laughing without a care because at this point it doesn't even matter if she dies. However, by the end of her journey in the Crimson Wastes, she has taken over a gang and even managed to capture Adora. It seems now that she can finally have everything she wants. Power, a feeling of superiority over Adora, and the ability to live happily away from the Horde. But she tosses it all away when she learns that Shadow Weaver has joined the rebellion. Her hatred and insecurity making her deny herself a chance at being happy. She then proceeds to destroy her relationships with Scorpia and Entrapta by electrocuting Entrapta before she can warn Hordak that their portal would destroy the planet. She then threatens to do the same to Scorpia unless she stays quiet about the portal and Entrapta being sent to Beast Island. The same fate that Entrapta saved Catra from at the beginning of the season. Entrapta's disappearance is then covered up by Catra lying to Hordak that Entrapta had betrayed him, leaving him to assume that once again he's been tossed away by the person he cares about. Catra activates the portal and then, while reality crumbles around them, fights Adora in a suicidal struggle to finally try to beat her. At this point, she no longer cares if she and everyone else on the planet dies, so long as it's a victory over Adora. And while she's fighting her, she blames Adora for everything that happened. If she had just stayed with her in the Horde, everything would have been fine. But this moment causes an epiphany for Adora. Over the series, she's struggled with being too hard on herself and viewing Catra's downward spiral as being her responsibility. But in this moment, she finally realizes that Catra has nobody to truly blame but herself. Despite having multiple opportunities to leave her problems behind and have a better life, she continuously makes bad decisions that drive everyone close to her away. And now that the whole world is in danger because of her self-destruction, Adora must face the fact that nobody can redeem Catra except for Catra herself. And she cements this moment of clarity with a solid punch to the face, signaling that Adora is done with Catra's pity party. This is an important message to show because it acknowledges that in spite of our upbringing, we can choose to be better, and we can only help people so much unless they're ready to help themselves. Catra's character is very sympathetic, but ultimately responsible for her own actions, and all the people they've hurt, including people going through the same kind of struggles she is. And with that, I am incredibly excited to see how this all goes from here for each of the characters in the next seasons. If it's on par with what we've seen so far, I think it's going to be something special. So to be fair with my analysis of the show, I have to acknowledge the show's faults. Firstly is the animation that, while not terrible, can get janky at times with action sequences that don't impress the same way the character writing does. You could also say the same about the show's world building, which is also not bad, but similarly isn't as impressive as how the show handles its characters. The series also has a slow start, as many of the first season's episodes are used to introduce each of the princesses in a formulaic way, but I'd say around Entrapta's introduction is when the show started to take off for me. Then there is the issue with the side princesses and how they are used. They aren't bad characters, but Season 2 onwards, they sort of feel lost in the shuffle, as they are either not featured in episodes or are all featured together, making them all have to share screen time with each other. In future seasons, I would like to see more episodes like Whiteout, where they take a single side character and have them tag along on an adventure so that more focus can be specifically on them. And my final issue is entirely Netflix's responsibility. Instead of releasing every season as being around 13 episodes, Season 2 onwards, each season has been half-length. This creates an awkward separation between Season 2 and Season 3, where Season 2 was originally supposed to be the lighter half that complemented the more story-heavy second half. By splitting the season, it makes Season 2 feel much more uneventful compared to Season 3, and Season 3 feels like it's lacking a lot of the side characters that were more prevalent in the first 2 seasons. While this won't really be an issue looking back on the show when it's completed, it does somewhat hinder the enjoyment of people watching the series as it goes on. Despite any of the flaws the series may have, I still strongly recommend it. It's a misunderstood show that I think needs more people to actually watch it before passing judgment. And if I got even one person to potentially give the show a chance, then I feel I've done a good job. Hey look, I'm doing one of those post-video things where I thank everybody for watching the video. But yeah, seriously though, thank you to everyone who watched the video, and thank you to everyone who watched my previous video. That's 10,000 views. I was not expecting that video to do that well. And I guess a lot of people agree with me that the ending of Star Versus sucks, so I guess that's a good thing. But really, I appreciate it, and definitely there will be more to come.